Somebody left a heads up penny up here. I don't know if that's a message to me. I need some good luck. Do what? Penny for my thoughts. All right. Well, you about to get them. I'm going to start this one a little different because we're taking such a big chunk. So if you want to turn, you can to Acts chapter 21. But I'll tell you, we're doing a really large section here. It's going to run from like the end of 21 all the way through 26. And so because of that, I mean, it's going to be necessary to really pull back and look at it from about 1,000 feet instead of really digging into all the details there. So I'm going to be referencing stuff from several of these chapters as we go through this, but I'm not going to be like digging in on big chunks of it to read or whatever. So if you want to have it open just because it's just better to have your Bible open, then go ahead and do that and go to 21. I'll reference stuff and you can quickly try to find it or whatever you want to do there. But again, it'll be a little bit different because I don't typically take this big of a chunk at a time. So before we go into it, I want to mention two things. Number one, our Carpenters for Christ team got back a couple of weeks back. Finally had a chance to talk to Randy this week, and looking forward to hearing a presentation from them. We talked last week about it was last week or the week before, I can't really remember anymore, but we talked about how when they get to Jerusalem, the first thing that the team does is they go find other believers, and what do? They share what good things God has done. And so it's definitely right and biblical to have opportunities to hear from other people who've been on mission, to hear what God's been doing through them. So we're going to be having a time here in the coming weeks where you're going to be able to hear some testimony from some of those folks that went on that team. But I say that also to say this, which is that there is another trip coming up on June 10th. So June 10th through the 17th. I know that's VBS week, so a lot of people that'll rule out because you're already serving in VBS. But if you're not, and you've been thinking about going on a mission trip, maybe you've never gone on one before, or you've been, but it's been a while, or you're just, you're newer here and looking for an opportunity. What can we do with missions here at this church? Well, that's one that you can do. And if you're a church member, we said that this year, this may not be forever, but at least for this year, if you're a member of Gownsville and you want to go on a Gownsville sponsored trip, then we'll pay half of the cost for that out of our missions trip budget, which is that's a pretty big deal. It's probably going to be the cheapest overseas mission trip that you could possibly ever go on. So if you've been thinking about it, this is your chance to do that. And this year, again, there's no guarantee that we'll do this next year. I don't know. I don't know why we wouldn't, but you never know. And so if that's you, please find Randy Atkins ASAP. He needs to know. If you don't know who Randy Atkins is, you can just find me, and I'll put you in contact with each other. And if you don't know who I am, then I don't know what to tell you. So you can find me. I'm easy to spot. Come grab me after the service is over and just say, hey, I'm interested in finding out more, and I'll put you in contact with Randy. So that's number one. And then number two, last week we had our big fellowship on the 5th. We made that also a town meeting where we discuss big things that are coming up in our church. And I took that opportunity to talk about a proposal that's being put forth by our personnel team to hire a full-time music minister in place of the part-time that we've done it for years and years. And I'm not going to even attempt to go into all of the very long, if you were there, which you do a big thing like that and you go, hey, really, come on, I really want you to hear about this, and a third of people show up. And it was a good group of people, and I'm very glad for everybody that did. But you may have not been able to come last week for one reason or another. But when I say I got something to share, I mean it. I had a lot to share last Sunday, so I can't go over that again with everybody. I'll put some stuff out that'll kind of go bullet points into what we talked about there in terms of reasoning, justification, financial things, that kind of thing, if you're interested in finding out more about that. But this is something that's been in the works for a good while, and we've just been trying to hash it out through the different channels. And so brought that to the group last Sunday night. And then that ultimately, that's not a decision that we can make. We can put that forth as leaders and as deacons and personnel and all of that. But that's your job as a church, congregationally, to determine whether or not we go forward with that or not. And so we have to bring that before you. And we'll be doing that in 2 weeks. So 2 weeks from today, we'll bring that as a proposal for you to vote as a church on whether we go forward with that. And again, if you have questions related to that, please don't hesitate to find me. I know it's easy to go ask somebody else that also wasn't there, like, hey, what in the world are we trying to do here with this? Well, just come to someone that was there, and they can tell you, or come to me or whatever, and we can talk about what it is and why and all those kinds of things. But I did want to get that. It's hard to figure out how to, if you really want to get everybody in the church to know something, you got to say it every week for about 6 to 8 weeks. And at that point, you get everybody, all right? So that's coming. So this is your intro to it if you weren't there last Sunday night. But again, look for information to come on that in the next week or so. That's all I have to say by way of announcement there. We left off last week in 21 with Paul finally arriving in Jerusalem. That's something that felt like it had been building for a long time, and it had been. He had been going for a couple of years making his way to Jerusalem. And so when he finally arrives there, it feels like sort of the ending of something. Like this is what he's been going for, and he finally gets there, and so now he's brought that journey to an end. But what you find out is it's actually not the beginning of anything. It's really, or the ending of anything. It's actually the beginning. Did I say it felt like the ending? Did I just say it felt like the ending of something? I don't know. I needed like 1 extra hour of sleep last night. Whatever I did say, it felt like the ending of something, but it wasn't the ending of something. It was actually just the beginning, right? It's like, have you ever ridden a water slide before? You go to Dollywood Splash Country in the summertime. We enjoy doing that, and there's 500 million other people that are also having the same idea as you. Hey, let's go so we can get in the water. And then by the time you've spent the whole day there, you've gotten to ride like 2 water slides because that's all you had time for. But I love to ride the water slides, but you go and you get in line at the bottom of the deal there, and you look at all the people and you wait and you just start slowly making your way up to the top. And you go up the stairs, and you don't just go straight to the top, right? There's very few water slides. The staircase is just one long, straight path to get to the top. No, it goes up to a platform, and then you wait on the platform for a while. That's the point where I'm freaking out the most with my enormous fear of heights that I have. And my kids are taunting me the whole time and making me feel really even more uncomfortable. But we get to the platform, we stop, then we turn and we start walking up the other platform to get up to the next platform. And eventually, after you've worked your way around to all the different platforms, you finally get to the top. But when you get to the top, you're not actually at the end of the thing, are you? You're really just at the beginning. That means all the climb, all the turns, all the platforms, all of that was you making one long trip to the beginning, to the very beginning. Because the beginning is the top. Where's the end? The end is at the bottom in the pool of water at the bottom of the slide. And so when Paul shows up in Jerusalem, he's actually showing up at the top of the slide. That's the top platform. He's not at the end. So where's the end point? Where's the slide going to come out at? And to see that, you can go back, if you remember, into chapter 19, verse 21, where it says, "Now after these events, Paul resolved in his spirit to pass through Macedonia." There's one of the platforms on the way to the top. "And Achaia," that's the other platform, "and go to Jerusalem," that's the top platform, saying, "After I have been there, I must also see Rome." So Rome was always Paul's end game. It wasn't Jerusalem. That was just the beginning. Rome was the end game there. And so what happened in Jerusalem when he shows up there, that's the slide that gets him where he's going. It's the water slide to get him to Rome. And so what happened when he gets to Jerusalem? That's what I want to look at. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out just how detailed to get into this section. And ultimately, I just kind of landed on, I'm going to give you the short version. I could give you the long, detailed, drawn-out version, or I could give you the short version. I'm going to do the short version. So here's the short version. What happens when Paul gets to Jerusalem? It was a hard few years. If I could sum it up in just one quick statement, that's what it would be. It was a hard few years for Paul. Paul gets mobbed in the temple and almost killed. Remember last week, the elders there in Jerusalem, the church leaders there in Jerusalem, they say, hey, if you would just go take a vow in the temple and go with these people who took a Nazirite vow and pay for them to offer their sacrifice to finish their vow, if you would just do that, then everybody would know that you support the law and that you're a good boy. We just want them to know you're a good boy. But what happens instead is he's immediately falsely accused of something that he didn't do. They stir a huge mob up. The mob drags him out of the temple and almost kills him. Then a Roman tribune shows up who's kind of responsible for keeping safety and peace in the public arena there. He shows up with about 200 soldiers, and they stop them from killing Paul, but that's not really something that's so, well, it's awesome he didn't get killed, but they put him under arrest. So the tribune arrests Paul in order to find out what the deal is, and then basically he spends the next 2.5 years or so just being shuffled around from one ruler to another ruler to another ruler to another ruler. First there in Jerusalem, and then a plot is discovered where people are going to take Paul's life. These 40 men there in Jerusalem take a vow that they're not going to eat or drink until Paul's dead. And to this day, they still have not eaten and drank because they did not get to kill Paul, right? The plot didn't work. It was discovered. And they transfer Paul from Jerusalem to Caesarea. And he spends about 2 years there in Caesarea, standing before two different governors of Judea, the governor Festus and the governor Felix. He stands before the king of Judea, King Agrippa II. He stands ultimately to appeal to Caesar himself. That's the ultimate thing, is that he would appeal to Caesar Nero. And so after he appeals to Caesar, they put Paul on a boat, still as a prisoner, and ship him off to Rome. And so that is the water slide that Paul went on in order to get to Rome. All of those things, he gets there, arrested, mobbed. He gets slapped in the face by the high priest. He's almost torn apart by the Sanhedrin. They're arguing over Paul, and they get so heated that they almost begin to pull at him, and the tribune has to step in and say, I got to put a stop to this before they tear him in two. All these things, and he never once broke a single law. That's how he gets to Rome. And so I guess a good question to ask there is, if Rome is the end game, isn't there an easier way to get there than that? If all God wanted to do is send Paul to Rome, why couldn't he have just put him on a boat 2 years before that and just sent him straight there? Why make him go this way? Why make him go in chains, in riots, in trials, in beatings, in pain? Why not let Paul just bypass all of that and go straight to the destination? And I wonder, do you ever feel that way in your life? Do you ever feel that way about what you're going through? Like, God, couldn't you just let me bypass the pain? Wouldn't that be a lot better if I could just bypass the pain? Like, I know that you have a course for me. I know you're calling me to something. There's a path I'm on. There's a ministry you've given me. There's a mission you have for me. There's a destination that you are taking me to. But does it really have to be that hard? And I think it's normal for all of us to feel that way, right? Would anybody raise their hand and say, I welcome it. I love pain. I love trials. Sign me up for it. Make it hard as it can be. That's what I want. I'm just looking for a tough time. I'm looking for misery. I'm looking for heartache. I'm looking for hardship. Anybody want to say that? No. None of us want that. We don't want the pain. We don't want the trials. We're conditioned in our life to avoid those things. So it's natural for you to say that. It's natural for you to think that. But if you linger in that for too long, if you linger in those thoughts and those questions, if you linger in asking, God, why? Why don't you take me another way? Why don't you let me avoid this? Why can't I just bypass all this pain? If you stay in that too long, then you need to understand that you are revealing something about yourself and about your heart that you might not even be aware of. You might not be aware of this, But to linger in those questions for too long, you're revealing that you think your life is all about you and all for you. Because if your life, if it's all about you, if you're the star of the show, if you're the hero of your journey, if it's all about you and everything you live for is for you, then of course you're going to want to avoid pain and avoid trials at all costs because it knocks you off your course. It knocks you off what you want to do. It takes you out of your comfort. It takes you out of your ease. It takes you out of what you feel like is the purpose for your life. But what if your life is not about you and not for you? What if that's the wrong way to see your life? What if your life is about God and for God instead of you? Would that change anything about the way you see your trials? I think it would. I think it changes everything if you saw your life that way. It doesn't mean I'm going to chase the pain. It doesn't mean I'm going to chase the trials. But it does mean that I can see that there is a purpose behind those trials. And what I see in this section, and you can go home and read the whole thing. It'll probably take you 40 minutes or so to do it if you want to. But what I see in this section is that God can use your pain as a platform for his purposes. Do you realize that? God uses your pain as a platform for his purposes. Now, he uses it for other reasons too. He'll do things in your life through it. He'll change you. He'll grow you. He'll deepen your faith. He'll deepen your dependence on him. All those things are a part of what he will use trials for in your life. But God can take your trials. This is where I'm going today. God can take and use your trials as a platform for your testimony. That's what I'm talking about. He can take your trials and use them as a platform for your testimony. I'll give you a personal example because sometimes we hear something like that and it seems sort of generic and we don't know what that might look like in our lives. I'll give you just a personal example from my life to show you what I mean. And then maybe it will help you see how you can take your trials and your pain and use them as a platform for God's purposes too. So most of you know that my sister died about a month and a half ago. It's right at 6 weeks or so that my sister died at 39 years old. And in the middle of that incredibly difficult pain that goes along with that, the heartbreak that goes with that, in the midst of that trial, God gave my family a platform that we would not have otherwise been able to have. It was a unique platform to share. We got to stand up, literally, my brother, my dad, myself, we got to stand up on a platform in front of several hundred people and hundreds more that watched it later on online. We got to stand before hundreds of people and we got to share that even in the middle of our hurt, even in the middle of the pain, even in the middle of the heartbreak we were experiencing as a family, that God was still good. We got to say that to people. We got to say that even in the middle of the trial, God was still good. We got to testify to his goodness. We got to testify in front of hundreds of people about the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. That yes, my sister is dead, but she's not dead forever. It's just temporary. Her body's dead for a time, but she's going to be raised from the dead one day. And we got to testify before those people of the hope we have in Jesus. And we got to tell people in those moments that all the things that we preach about, all the things that we tell other people, guess what? We believe them too. And we're walking it now. And you can look at us, not to see us, but you can look at us to see the strength, the power, the grace, the mercy, the carrying of God as he walks us through step by step, week by week, sometimes even second by second through the pain of what happened there. We got to share that. Now, does that make me glad for the pain? Am I glad for the pain? Did I want that to happen? Am I happy that happened? Absolutely not. I hated it then. I hate it today. I would never wish that to happen. I would never have wished that to happen in our family or anybody else's family, but it did happen, and here's what I'm glad about. I'm not glad it happened, but I'm glad God took that, and I'm glad God used that as a way to give us a platform to offer testimony of God and His goodness and power and grace. That's what I'm glad for. And I'm not saying, God, let my sister die so we could preach her funeral. Like, you know what would be great? If Josh, Al, and Jonathan got to preach Jennifer's funeral. No, it wasn't that. God didn't let her die so we could do that, but God took that trial and He used that trial to give us a unique opportunity to share a testimony that nobody else could have shared in that same situation with people that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to share it with. And that's what Paul experiences here in this text. That God told him when He called him way back in Acts chapter 9. If you've been here the whole series, that feels like ages ago, and it was. But He told him back in Acts 9 that one day he was going to testify in front of kings. Now, how else do you think that's going to happen? Do you think just anybody gets a hearing with the king? Like, you know what I'd like to do today? I'd like to go talk to the king. Go knock on the door. Hey, I'm Paul. I'd like to share with the king. Do you think just anybody gets to go before the governors? You need to make an appointment. You ever tried to make an appointment with a high official somewhere? It's a little hard to get a hold of them. Do you think just anybody gets to stand before the emperor himself, Emperor Nero? How else does that happen? But it happened for Paul. Why did it happen? How did it happen? Here you go. The only reason it happened was because of the trials. That's it. It was only because of the trials. And I want you to know this morning, there are some things God wants to do through you that He can only do through trials. There's some people He wants you to minister to, that the only way you get that opportunity is through the trials. And there's some things you're going through right now. And there's some things you've gone through. And there's some things that you're going to go through. And they're going to be hard. They're going to be painful. They're going to be trials. But they're going to put you in a unique position to testify. An opportunity you would not have otherwise had. And so if all you're trying to do is figure out a way out of the trials, because isn't that what we do? We get in a trial, all of our focus, everything goes into, how do I get out of this? How do I get out of this pain? If that's your only focus, I'm not telling you to sit in it. I'm not telling you to be content with the trials. I'm not telling you you never try to get out of them, just soak up the bad. I'm not telling you that. I'm saying if that's all you do, if your whole purpose, your sole purpose in the middle of your trial is to get out, then you're going to miss the opportunity that God has for you to testify in the middle of the trials. So don't just look at your trials, you need to look for the platform God has for you to testify. Paul was ready. Of all people, Paul always saw his trials as a platform for his testimony. You can go trace his life. When he was in jail, what did he do? He testified to the jailers. He testified to the other prisoners. When he was in a mob, read through the rest of 21. They're trying to kill him. He says, hey, can you hold on just a second? I'd like to share. What does he do? Testify to the mobs. When he stands before the Sanhedrin, they're about to pull him apart. What does he do? Testifies to the Sanhedrin. When he stands before the governors, he testifies to them. When he stands before the king, he testified to him. When he stands before Caesar, he testified to him. Every single opportunity trials presented to Paul, he used them as a platform to testify of the goodness, mercy, grace, love, power of God. And if you are able to see your trials and your pain that way, it will change the way that you see them. It'll change the way you live. You're going to see your trials as a platform for your testimony. And when that happens, you're going to be living in the purpose God has for you, instead of just being caught up in what the trial means to you. It ain't just about you. It's not just about you. So the question I want to look at from the text today, what do your trials give you the platform to testify about? What do your trials give you the platform to testify about? Two things. Number one, your trials give you a platform to testify to the truth. In chapter 26, Paul's sharing testimony in front of King Agrippa and then the governor Festus. And before he even finishes talking, Festus just steps in and interrupts him. And this is what he says to him. He says, Paul, you are out of your mind. Your great learning is driving you out of your mind. So he says, you're crazy, Paul. All the things you poured into your mind, they're driving you crazy. They're making you mad. You need to stop for a second. Reground yourself, Paul. Recenter yourself, Paul. You're going mad here. And Paul answered like this in verse 25. He said, I am not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I am speaking, listen to this, true and rational words. What is Paul doing? Paul is laying out the truth in the middle of distortions, misunderstanding, lies, and confusion. And so if you read through this whole section, what you're going to find is there is a lot of confusion that's going on in this section. There's confusion all around. There's confusion in 21. Over whether Paul went into the temple with a group of Gentiles. There's confusion over whether or not Paul was anti-law. There was confusion over why the mob was so worked up about him. There was even confusion in 21 about who Paul even is. The tribune, when he shows up on the scene, he mistakes Paul for this Egyptian insurrection leader who had led an insurrection a couple of years before and then taken 200 men and gone off into the wilderness for a couple of years and hadn't been seen from since. So this guy thinks it's this guy coming back, and that's why the mob is so worked up. As you move into into chapter 22, it's still the same thing. Confusion. Verse 30 there says the tribune's trying to figure out, listen, the real reason Paul was being accused by the Jews. He's under arrest. They don't even know why. They don't know why he's under arrest, even the guy that arrested him. And then you move on all throughout the rest of the section. The confusion keeps going all the way through 26. Nobody can understand why Paul is arrested, what the charges being presented against him even are. And yet all throughout the whole process, no official even once, no governor, not Festus, not Felix, not Agrippa, nobody once just says, hey, we don't even know why he's under arrest. Why don't we let him go? Nobody says that. So they're saying, hey, we're just trying to figure out the truth. But guess what? They don't really want the truth. All they want, what their actions show, is all they want is they just don't want any more trouble from the mobs. So he's arrested just to placate the mobs of people that hated Paul. That's it, in their mind. But that's not the real reason. That's not the reason why they didn't let him go. They think that's the reason, but God had a different reason. The real reason why Paul was not set free and let go is because God had a platform for Paul to defend the truth to people who would not otherwise get to hear it. In chapter 24, verse 10, he's standing in front of Phillips, the governor in Caesarea, and he says, I cheerfully make my defense. And that word defense there, that's the word apologia. It's where we get the word apologetics from. If you've ever studied Christian apologetics, it's a defense of the existence of God. It's very fascinating stuff. But in a general sense, it's just a defense. He's making a defense. And what's interesting is, in all the defense speeches that he makes over these several chapters here, in all the speeches that he makes, he's not so much making a defense of himself, but he's making a defense of God. One commentator said, the apologetic here is more about the promise of God than about defending oneself before Rome. In other words, Paul's doing very little to really clear his name, but he's doing a lot to defend God and to defend the gospel. That's his goal in this. Because see, Paul understood what the root issue was. He understood the root issue that he was facing here was not something he did, some law he broke, religious law, civil law. He understood that wasn't what it is. He understood that the real reason he was there, the real issue he was facing was that these people that he's standing in front of needed the gospel. That's the real issue. So that's why he keeps going back to it. Every single person he testifies to. Let me share the gospel. Let me tell you the truth. And the other thing is, they needed it from somebody that passionately believed it. Do you passionately believe the gospel? When you defend the gospel, is it just rote to you? It's just kind of like, well, yeah, I believe it. I don't know about you. And are you passionate about it? People need that because, see, all they're hearing about Jesus, they're hearing it from people that don't believe in Jesus. Not people that don't believe he existed. Everybody knew he existed. But from people who believe he didn't exist anymore. See, they all knew he died. They just didn't believe he was still alive. And so that's why Paul you can read through this. He keeps going back time and time again and driving that testimony back again and again to the truth of the resurrection. And what I want you to see in this is you can only do that in a scenario like this. You can only do that if you understand you were put there, if you understand you were put in this trial for this exact reason. Because otherwise, you're just going to be defending yourself. You won't be able to defend God, defend the gospel, because you'll be so busy trying to defend you. But Paul knows why he's here. He knows why he's on trial. He says in 23 verse 6, "It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial." So Paul gets it here. He's not on trial for going into the temple with some Gentiles. He's on trial so that he can share the truth about the resurrection of Jesus Christ to people that don't know, don't believe it. And so I want to ask you this morning, do you get it? Do you understand why you're going through some of the trials you're going through? What's the root issue? What's the platform for truth God wants you to share? And that's a big reason why you're going through what you're going through right now. That's what God wants to do with it. He's giving you a platform to share truth. Number 2. Your trials give you a platform to testify to your transformation. To your transformation. I love transformation stories. Do you like to hear transformation stories? How many of you ever watched Biggest Loser? Did you ever watch Biggest Loser? I used to watch The Biggest Loser back in the day when it was on. I guess it's just me, but I love watching that stuff. I love to see what somebody was, what they used to be, and then what they did to change, and then what their life was transformed into. I love that stuff. Even though, maybe that show didn't resonate with me in the sense that I'm trying to accomplish the same things they're trying to accomplish, but it resonated with me because I have things in my life I want to change. I don't think I'm alone in that. Do you have some things in your life you'd like to see transformed? Is there some things you're trying to change? You want to see change about yourself? Somebody wants to lose some weight. Somebody wants to get in shape. Somebody's trying to quit smoking. Somebody's trying to get off certain medicines. Somebody's trying to quit cussing. Somebody's trying to have better relationships. Somebody's trying to see some things change in their life. And so you hear that and it resonates. You hear that story of transformation and you go, hey man, that's what I want to see happen. Maybe not the same thing, but I want to see that happen in my life. And so you watch it and you get inspired and you start to think, maybe because it happened with them, maybe it can happen with me. And I got some hope. That's why a testimony is so powerful. And when we talk about a Christian testimony, we're talking about a Christian transformation story. That's what a testimony is. You're not just testifying that you prayed a prayer. Who is inspired by that? Hey, can I tell you an incredible story? Man, one day I prayed and asked Jesus to come into my heart. Okay. And? Tell me how God changed you. Tell me what God did in your life. I want to see who you were, what happened, and who you are now. That's what I want to see. Every Christian, if you're a believer, you have some measure of transformation story to share. And everyone has three basic elements. They all have who I was before I met Christ, how I met Christ, and how my life has changed since then. You don't want to leave off any of those things. All three of those things matter. And if you read through these chapters, you find Paul sharing his transformation story about 3 different times. And the last one is the most detailed when he stands before Agrippa in chapter 26. That's the most detailed one out of the 3. You can go read that later when you get a chance. But I want you to see 2 things about the way that he does it that I think we can learn from to help us as we share the story of our transformation. Number 1, the first thing is how Paul connects his story with his hearers in a way that they can see themselves in the story. He connects his story with his hearers in a way that helps them see themselves in his story. It's kind of, I'll give you an example of what not to do, and that might help you. It's like if someone invites you to come share your testimony in front of a group of kindergartners. Say, hey, would you come share your Christian testimony story with a group of kindergartners? Is it a good idea to go into that setting with that audience and go on and on about how you used to sling dope and the shady scenarios that you got involved in and the time you almost got stabbed and how you got put in jail and all this kind of stuff and all how horrible prison was, and you describe it in depth to the kid? Is that the way to do that? Probably not, because that's beyond them, right? That's not connecting with them. You're not connecting with your listeners. They can't see themselves in that. They're just like eyes big and horrified at what a horrible life you used to live. Better it might be to start with when I was your age. You know, I used to disobey my teachers. I used to disobey my parents. You know, I always talked back. When they told me to clean my room, I said, no way, and I ran out. Maybe that's the place to start in describing your past. You're looking for ways. That's what I'm challenging you right now, okay? As you think practically about yourself, think about the platform God's given you. Through your trials or through whatever it is that you're going through, think about the platform. Think about the people that he's given you a platform with. What is it in your story that you can connect with them over? You know, when Paul shared with different groups, his story sounded different. It wasn't that either one was not true. It's just the things he highlighted depended on who he was talking to. And so in this section, what you find is he's testifying and giving his story mostly to a Jewish audience. Most of the people he's talking to are Jewish. And so what does Paul do? He connects with them. They're all Pharisees, Sadducees. And so he connects in that way. He shares about his Jewish history and background. He shares about the fact that, hey, I used to be a Pharisee. I was raised as a Pharisee, trained as a Pharisee. That means I was zealous over the law. And as zealous as you all are for the law, I want you to know I was even more zealous than you are. And more than that, I persecuted followers of the way. I persecuted people that believed in Jesus. I would hunt them down. I would arrest them. I'd drag them out of their homes in front of their kids. I would seek to find them and get them to blaspheme Jesus, deny Jesus. I separated families. I had people lose their jobs. I even voted to kill people because of that. And he said, I did it all. Why? Why did I do that? I did it because I didn't know Jesus. That explains it. You want to explain my past? Here's the explanation. I was rotten, but I was rotten because I didn't know the Lord. That's why. I believe that Jesus was a dead Messiah, a Messiah wannabe. He gave it a go, but he got arrested. He got killed. He got buried in the ground. And now my goal is to put all his followers in the ground. And he would have kept on down that road if not for one big thing. And it's that the Jesus he believed was dead and a failed Messiah shows up on the road while he's on his way to Damascus to persecute Christians. The risen Lord Jesus shows up and appears to Paul. And he knocks him down and he blinds him. And then he picks him up again. And he sets him out in a new direction. And that encounter with the risen Jesus changed everything about Paul's life. Everything. His eyes were open now, metaphorically. He can see the light. He has spiritual understanding of who Jesus really is and what Jesus came to do. He's no longer in darkness. He no longer has a purpose that opposes Jesus, he said. He no longer opposes Jesus. No, God called him. Jesus called him to go and to serve him and to follow a new purpose in his life. And everyone that hears that, all of the Jews that hear that are supposed to hear that. And they're supposed to put themselves in his story. And they're supposed to go, maybe he's more like us than we thought. I can see me in that. Is that me he's talking about? I know he's talking about himself. Hey, a good testimony. You ever listen to a good testimony? And they're talking about them, but the whole while it feels like they're talking about you. They're like, oh, shoot, he's talking to me. That's the point. I want you to hear you in my story. Maybe that is me. He was like us. And if this man, who was so against Jesus, now believes in Jesus, maybe there's something to Jesus. Maybe we missed it. That's what you're supposed to hear. When you're sharing your story, think about ways that you can connect. You don't have to craft it meticulously, but just know who you're talking to. And then number 2, Paul connects his transformation story with the truth. And I think this is the most important part here, that your transformation goes hand in hand with the truth. Why is that? It's because it's the truth that transforms you. If I don't connect my transformation to the truth about who God is, what God did, I'm leaving off the most important part. And we need to hear this because so often, amen, in a life that's all about us, when we share our story, who do we make the hero of the story? So often we put ourselves as the hero. We go on and on about who we were in the past, but now, look what I did. Look what I changed into. Look what I became. But what I want you to hear, if you don't hear anything else, this is what I want you to hear. The platform in your trials, that platform, is not your platform. It's not yours. It's God's platform. And he put you on it. Not so you could tell everybody about the amazing things you did, but so that you can tell everybody of the way Jesus changed your life. That's how you connect your transformation to the truth. Paul didn't share his story because he wanted them to like him. He didn't share his story because he wanted to rebuild his reputation. He didn't share his story so they could just get to know him. Just a little sharing time that we're having together so you can get to know me a little bit better. He didn't share it for any of those reasons. No, the only reason Paul, time after time, shares his story was to tell them about how Jesus changed his life so that they could see that Jesus will change their lives too if they'll let him. So when you tell your story of transformation and change, make sure you are connecting it tightly, integrated with the truth. Don't make yourself the hero. Don't make yourself the star of the show. No, you want Jesus to be the star and the hero of your story. I trusted Jesus. Look what he did in my life. I want to close this way. How are you using your trials? Let me invite whoever's left of the praise team. If you come up, I'm going to close with Jesus paid it all today. Because, quite honestly, I didn't tell you guys, so sorry about that. But I want to close with that song because I want you to have a minute or two to reflect. What does God want to do through your trials? What's the platform that he's giving you through whatever it is that you're going through right now? And you've been thinking that this is all about you. You've been going, God, what are you trying to do in me? And that's a perfectly fine question. Because God's doing something in you through your trial. But right now I want you to ask, God, what do you want to do through me with this trial? With what I went through? It might have been last year. It might have been 5 years ago. It may be right now. Whatever it is, I want you to understand God wants to use that for his purpose, to give you a platform to share testimony through your trials. I don't know who it'll be for. I don't know who he's going to use it to reach, minister to, help. I have no idea, but I do know this. I know this, and I hope you believe it. You are uniquely positioned to be used through the trials God is putting you through. Uniquely. Nobody else is going through the exact same trial at the exact same time in the exact same person. You're one person. You're unique in that. And so God wants to use you uniquely to reach somebody with the truth that transforms. And I want you to stand. We're going to sing. And I want you to reflect and pray. And if God is moving in your heart right now, if there's some decision you need to make, if you need to give your heart to Jesus, if you need to commit your life to serving his purpose, if you need someone to pray with you, walk with you through that, I'm going to be waiting at the back. Kent will be back there. Go find him. Go share with him. Let him take you and share with you how you can give your heart, your life to Jesus and let him change you so he can use you for his glory as we sing.